In the Limousin district of France sits the once prosperous village of Oradour-sur-Glane, a popular destination for visitors both before and after the Second World War. Prior to the war, city dwellers of nearby Limoges enjoyed the tranquillity and fresh air that the village had to offer, and the River Glane which ran near the town offered excellent fishing. Still a popular visitor destination today, unfortunately, however, for entirely different reasons. Reasons that came about with the barbaric events of the 10th of June 1944, which saw 328 buildings destroyed and 642 men, women and children massacred. Of the population of Oradour-sur-Glane that day, just 5 survived. It was shortly after 2 p.m. when the first German troop carriers entered the village. Nobody was concerned. There hadn't been any problems with the occupying forces before. Slowly, more vehicles arrived, dropping off troops. The sound of the village drums summoned the villagers to assemble on the green known as the fairground. But still, there was little concern. A rumour circulated that the Germans were here merely to check papers. Now that everybody was assembled, they were split into 2 groups, women and children in one, and men in the other. The women and children were led away to the church. For some this must have been a relief. Surely nothing could happen to them in this sacred place. An hour passed, and the men were split into several groups, and they were led into 7 separate buildings, including 3 barns and 2 garages. At about 4 o'clock, an explosion rang out. It was the signal for the massacre to begin. Machine guns placed in the doorways of the buildings where the men were held started firing low and indiscriminately at the legs of the prisoners, who fell on top of one another. They kept firing until nothing moved. Then calmly, the German soldiers walked through the piles of bodies, finishing off anything that moved. Without any sense of morality for what they had just done, the soldiers covered the bodies with straw and wood and anything that would burn. They lit their fires and calmly walked away, leaving those that were still alive to be burned to death. In the church, the women had heard the explosion and machine gun fire and must have realised what was happening to the men. Was the same fate awaiting them? The church door opened and 2 or 3 soldiers threw in a box with lit strings protruding from it. They slammed the door shut again and the box started to let out a thick cloud of choking, poisonous gas. Some women ran to the doors, but as they opened them were pushed back inside by machine guns firing on them from the outside. One woman, Madame Roufanche, managed to crawl behind the altar and climb up and out of the window behind it. She dropped down the 12 or 15 feet to the ground below and hid in the field adjacent to the church, where she spent the next hours semi-conscious and exhausted. The German troops looted the village, setting light to every building, destroying any evidence of their terrible deed. They spent the night getting drunk on wine from the well-stocked cellars of the people they had murdered, before calmly moving on the following morning. The fires that had raged throughout the night did little to hide their awful crime. Speculation continues to circulate as to the reason for the massacre, but to this day no one is certain why it happened. Many of those involved were brought to trial. They showed little compassion for their acts, and although committed to prison or sentenced to death, were released or pardoned shortly afterwards. General de Gaulle ordered the preservation of the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane. The stones of the village, laid out like those of so many other villages, now laid bare with the passage of time, must be remembered as a once thriving community. A testimony to the inhumanity and brutality not only of war, but also that of mankind.